recording. There we go. All right, so like I said, UV unwrapping, it's that process of taking a three-dimensional model and turning it into a 2D version of itself, right? U and V really just mean X and Y in texture space. Textures, whether it's sculpted data you're baking into a displacement map or normal map, us would be a normal map, or just any other kind of map that you're painting to control metalness or glow or color, which we'll be seeing as well in later videos. All those things are two-dimensional pictures, two-dimensional images, right? A collection of square pixels with color information in them. So we need to have that model kind of basically unwrapped, right? Kind of reverse engineered, like, pelting an animal or how clothing is made, right? But we're going backwards, right? We're cutting the seams, peeling off the fabric back into its two-dimensional pattern parts, and we're trying to lay them out so they're low wrinkle, what we call low distortion, right? So what we need to do here for UV unwrapping, and I don't even think we'll necessarily unwrap this whole thing, but we'll kind of explore it a little bit. In this case, I can always turn off the eyeballs for some of these other things, right? Remember, you can just go in here and turn the eyeballs off, so we only see this. And you'll notice that there is a workspace called UV editing, right? UV editing. So I'm going to click on the UV editing workspace. And you'll notice what it does is it does a couple of things. One, we still have a 3D view to do stuff in. But now you'll see there's a two-dimensional view. This is where we'll see our UVs and have our UV options, right? Now, in this case, we're not seeing anything because we're not really in face mode. So if I hit 3 for faces, and then I do Control A, you will see all of a sudden that we see UVs here, right? We also see that we have a UV menu here with a bunch of our UV tools, right? And we're not going to use all of them. We're primarily going to focus on things like marking seams and unwrapping, right? That's going to be a lot of our big stuff. We'll do a bit of packing things down here as well. But, to do pretty good UV unwrapping, you don't actually need a lot of those tools. Some of those tools are just there for the occasional other things you might need them for. But you can see that there are UVs here. Now, in this case, I do want to just start you off without the distortion grid today, just to show you how the process works. We're not going to finish the table up today. We'll kind of finish it up in later videos and then kind of move on to doing some other unwrapping for other things. But this will work as a good introduction video, right? Kind of a starter place for us. But yeah, so we've got, actually, let's do it, because we should have that texture on there. So one of the things you could do is, one, we could always minimize our viewport here, so I could always grab this little bar. Remember, you can always move around and shrink and close these different parts of your interface in Blender, right? So if you want to make them bigger, smaller, see more options, you can, right? So if I move this over, we can see we've actually got a couple of our different display types here, right? There's wireframe, there's shaded. This one is material preview. It's basically Eevee, and it's going to show you full texturing on the model. So oftentimes when I'm painting, or I want to see my normal maps, or even other textures, I'll switch to this third ball here, right? Now, we notice that there is, right, in our properties menu, we've seen this before, but we've never really talked about it before. There is this blue, or a red, kind of sphere at the bottom here, and it kind of looks like it's got a bit of a checkerboard in it, right? It's really kind of the red, and it's almost like a salmon red, right? Kind of right down here, way down at the very bottom, right? When you click on this, it brings up your material. Now, right now, there is a default material that's on everything, right? So what I could do if I want to is just use this default material, and I could click on the yellow dot for the base color, right? The yellow dot for the base color. You can actually change the color right here for your material, right? So you can actually change all that stuff. But I want to actually plug an image in. I want to plug a texture in. So if I click on the yellow dot for base color, it brings this up. And you see there's an option called image texture. And once we do that, you'll notice that this becomes available. We can open a texture from outside if we want to. But in this case, I want to make a new one. So what I do is I click on, so once I find that image texture, it creates this. I click on new. I'm going to call this UV, just so it's got a name. And I think 1024 by 1024 pixels will be fine for us, but if you want to see it a little more detailed, you can always type in a bigger number. I'll leave 1024 because it should be enough to show distortion, but I often do use higher resolution ones just because I see smaller checker squares and it's better at detecting distortion. But for us on this first one, this should be fine. And what I do want to do is I want to go to generated type. Right now it says blank. So if I click on that, you'll notice one of the options is UV grid. UV grid. There's technically color grid also, but UV grid will be a little more straightforward for us. And we hit OK. And we now see there's actually a generated checkerboard texture from Blender on our model. That's actually how you plug a texture in to a specific material channel. We're going to be seeing this more in depth as we go along. We do texturing, so that's not going to be the last time we see the material stuff. This is just our first time seeing it, right? A lot of you are probably not even ready to UV wrap it. You're still doing some other modeling, so this is really more like, hey, we got to get some new lecture out there. We'll do a review lecture on this, of course. We'll have it in video form. But, you know, sometimes we have to do that first lecture. And some of you guys are ready for it also, right? Or close enough. But that little kind of a red salmonish color kind of sphere at the very bottom of our properties menu, that's your material stuff. The default material is fine for us for right now. We'll create unique materials for each object later on. And I just went to the yellow dot for the base color, clicked on it, it gives me that menu that gives me options. One of them is image texture. It plugged in and it had like a new and an open feature. I clicked on new, and that's where I could give it a name. I could pick the generated type, blank, and use UV grid. And now we have a UV grid on there. But you'll notice it kind of gets really squashed here and stretched. But this is great at letting us see distortion, right? If it's got a lot of wrinkles or not a lot of wrinkles, right? And we want not a lot of wrinkles. We want low distortion, right? So we want low or zero wrinkle, right? And this checkerboard is really good at showing us that. Quite easy to create. It'll go on all the other objects. Like you'll see the other objects should have it as well. If they don't, we just have to make sure that the material is assigned to them, right? We'll come back to that later on. But there we go. We've got it here. Now, in this case, I could probably unwrap this better, right? The default UVs that come with a model usually aren't that good, right? And the more complicated the model, the more likely your UVs have gotten horrible, right? So even though they're built into the model, we have to lay them out properly, right? But having this checkerboard grid, the UV grid on, helps us see the distortion. Now, if I want to, I could turn on the shader, right? You see how if you change these balls right here, one's a fully white solid ball, and the other one actually looks a lot like the material one, right? Because it's basically your EV texture preview, material preview, which is actually quite good. We'll see this more as we work as well, and it's quite awesome in Blender. So we'll go back to kind of our white ball there, because I want to add seams to this. So how do I add seams? Well, seams are basically edges. So I'm actually teaching you most of what you need for UV wrapping today. We're just going to reinforce it a lot and kind of show us a few other features. But believe it or not, just on this table, you're going to see the fundamentals of UV wrapping, right? There's actually not much to it. It's just boring, right? So seams are edges and edge loops. So to select and make our seams, we just hit 2 for edge selection, right? And what I could do is I could double left click to select edge loops, right? Double left click. And so it went through and it selected that edge loop. We'll kind of double left click on that one. Shift double left click, right? Shift adds. Now I could keep adding seams if I want to, but you can do this as you go also. Right click. When you right click, we've seen this a bunch of times in our previous videos and our previous projects. It brings up our edge context menu, right? And it's a lot of our edge modeling tools, but you will see down here, we have an area called Mark Seam and Clear Seam. Mark Seam makes a seam. Clear Seam gets rid of it. So if you want to get rid of seams, clear them. If you want to make seams, mark them. So you just right-click to bring up Edge Context menu when you're in Edge mode, because edges and edge loops are seams. So we right-click, Mark Seam, and now you'll see it's red. indicating it's marked. Now, I wanted this kind of nice little kind of tabletop in here to be flat. I figure we're going to help this one along by kind of selecting the bottom here as well. So double left click, shift double left click, right click, mark seam. And this could give us a start that might actually work out pretty well for us. Let's see what it looks like when we unwrap it. We might have to add a seam or two, that's okay. But it gives us some starting seams, and it shows us how we make a seam. The seam is really just edges or edge loops. You right-click, mark seam. Now I'm going to go to 3 for face mode, and Control A for select, right? Remember, 3 is face selection mode. Control A is your select all. It's default, right? I didn't set this up. It's default Blender, Control A. Remember, it is in the select menu, select all. At this point, I can kind of move this over a little bit. And let's actually turn our material preview on there, right? Remember that little ball right up here? That looks like a bit of a checkerboard ball. A lot like the red salmonish color one down here. Move this over just a little bit so there's a little more space in the viewport here. And we can go to the UV menu here. Right, there is, in the UV editing workspace, there is the UV viewport right here. So it's two-dimensional, showing our UVs. We can go to the UV menu, and there is a feature called unwrap. Unwrap. And you see how that actually did a pretty good job? You see how now we can kind of see what that's that, and even that's kind of the outer ring. And you'll notice that even on the outer ring, we're not seeing that much distortion. Right? Remember, it's usually not necessarily about getting zero distortion as much as getting low. The more seams you put on, though, that will generally help you to get better distortion. So this could even be one of those things where, you know, maybe we'll go in here and maybe add a little bit of an extra seam through here, right? I could double left click there, just to select that whole center edge loop. Now in this case, I am going to shift to deselect these ones, right? So that way the kind of bottom and this top flat coplanar polygons will be their own seams. Right click, mark seam, and now there's a new seam there. 3 for face, Control A. Just go back to UV, unwrap. And you saw it actually handled at getting this lower distortion here. Also, it allows us to pack a little bit better. So sometimes you try to have fewer seams, but then it makes it a little bit harder to pack and get as much of the pixels used. All of these areas that don't have UVs over them are wasted pixels. Those won't show up in the texture, they're wasted. There's always a little bit of waste, right? So it's about minimizing it if you can. In this case, we can't really minimize it much more past here. We might end up taking our other objects and combining them there. But this was just meant to show you how to make seams, how and where the unwrap feature was, and to really get you the core fundamentals. This is basically all the rest of the UV unwrapping lecture on this is going to be the same stuff primarily. I'll eventually be able to pack and do a few other things, but this is honestly about 75% of all of the UV unwrapping we're going to do for the rest of this. There's not much to it. It's usually pretty fast and easy. Blender has some pretty good stock UV unwrapping tools and a pretty nice workflow for them. But we can see that we basically have turned this 3D model into a 2D version of itself. Now you'll notice that I could go in here and I could select the faces and I could move them, but you notice how it's not moving this model? It's just moving the UVs in relation to the texture underneath it. So these are related to each other, and you can see that these represent this, but they have some level of independence, right? They're connected, but they're not necessarily identical, right? That's UV unwrapping. And all of your selection tools work in here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 actually lets you do island selects, which is much like select connected or object select, but for UVs. And all your selection tools will work in here too. Double left click, circle select, move, rotate, scale, all the same quickies will work for those. So that's how UV unwrapping works. Now, if you click off and your UVs go away, they didn't go away, you just don't have them selected, right? You have to select all. All right, so this is just meant to be kind of a good little starter for us. I'll go to File, Save As, and I'm going to call this table UV, right, underscore UV, so that way we know that it's the UV version. All right, let me stop that recording.